How's it going everyone, and welcome back to a brand new video, and today we're going to be talking about the redemption of Star Wars games, as Star Wars games over the past 20 or so years have been a roller coaster ride to say the very least. Lots of ups, lots of downs, and one of those downs was the recent handling of the Star Wars license by EA. But in the past 6 months or so, everything has seemed to have changed regarding Star Wars games. There is optimism everywhere, people are hyped for upcoming Star Wars games. It's like the common perception of Star Wars games has done a complete 180 in the past 6 months alone. Now, I did a video last month talking about the redemption of Battlefront 2 and just that alone, so that was of course just limited to Battlefront 2. And the redemption of Star Wars games and the complex history runs a lot deeper than just that one game. So we're going to get into all of it throughout this video and go a lot more in depth, discuss the history of Star Wars games and what led to the downfall. And then of course we will walk through the resurgence and redemption of Star Wars games under the helm of EA. Now, in order to get to all of this, let's cast ourselves back to the early to mid 2000s, the era of Star Wars games that a lot of gamers deemed to be the golden era of Star Wars games. This was the time where LucasArts was just on a complete hot streak with Star Wars games, with the release of one of the best RPGs of all time, Knights of the Old Republic, as well as the near masterpiece Star Wars Battlefront II 2005 and an array of amazing Star Wars games that fans still enjoy to this day. Now, I think it's fair to say if we were getting as many Star Wars games in the current day as we were in the 2000s, it would be one hell of a time to be alive. It's pretty crazy looking back at just how many Star Wars games were coming out in this time period, and what was crazier was the amazing quality of these games. Now, I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up LucasArts, but there was a lot of misfires and games that were just flat out not good. So things weren't always sunshine and roses for Star Wars games. There were a lot of duds and disappointing sequels. Just the second half of the decade in the 2000s weren't the best. But things did turn around in a big way with Star Wars The Old Republic, an MMORPG set in the Old Republic era, which of course gained a lot of praise and is still somewhat popular to this day. And it's certainly still worth checking out for any Star Wars fan. So the last of what would remain as the technically non-EA associated Star Wars games ended there, at least for the time being. And in April 2013, LucasArts, who brought us all of these amazing Star Wars games over the past decade and beyond, were shut down, with in-development Star Wars games being cancelled in the process as well. It was basically the end of an era and a pretty sour thing to go down at the time. So that brings us to May 2013, when Disney and EA jointly announced that EA would hold the rights to make Star Wars games for the next several years. Now, this was met with a lot of different emotions. The idea of having an EA budget of a AAA Star Wars game was certainly appealing to fans. But then again, people were met with caution because EA were taking over, and when that happens, things tend to go a little bit pear-shaped. And there were of course people that were a little salty with LucasArts being shut down and previous in-development Star Wars games being scrapped. But the general consensus was that between Disney kickstarting Star Wars again on the big screen with Episode 7 and EA's acquisition of the Star Wars gaming license, there was going to be a lot of Star Wars going on in the years to come. Now, flash forward to 2015 with the release of Star Wars Battlefront, an extremely immersive Star Wars experience with incredible graphics. It seemed as if it was a game that just couldn't really go wrong, bringing what we loved from the original Battlefront games to the modern era. Star Wars Battlefront sold an incredible amount of copies despite mostly negative reviews at launch. Nobody could fault the immersion or the graphics, but people could fault the lack of content and the season pass, and did they ever. Battlefront was very hollow upon its release and died out relatively quickly, with a cult following sticking around until the game's live service came to a halt. So then focus could be shifted onto a sequel. Now, for those who did stick around and did pay for the season pass, for the most part they were not disappointed, with 4 very solid expansions that made the game feel much larger than it really was. But with a lack of content, an expensive paid season pass and no campaign, Battlefront 2015 was largely seen as a disappointment and the damage was just already done. Now, enter in Battlefront II 2017, the sequel that was supposed to be everything that Battlefront 2015 never was, including all 3 eras of Star Wars, more heroes, free DLC, and a canon single-player campaign told from the perspective of the Empire. They even brought in John Boyega in a trailer dedicated to flex on just how much better Battlefront 2 would be than its predecessor. And in the lead up to the game's launch, most people who were burnt by EA's treatment of the first Battlefront game were willing to give EA's Star Wars games another chance. And it turned out to be a grave mistake, with Battlefront II having arguably the most chaotic and controversial launch of any AAA game in history. Between the campaign that turned out to be a massive disappointment for betraying its main selling point, and the loot box drama and the locking of heroes like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader behind a stupidly grindy credit paywall, it was just a total mess. And with this terrible launch, it's fair to say that Star Wars games under EA had become the brunt of many jokes and were just in total disarray. People were practically done with EA's mistreatment of the Star Wars license, and petitions had already started for Disney to take away their rights. And to Disney's credit, they did step in. They gave EA a slap on the wrist in the process. So from there on out, Battlefront 2 kept somewhat of a player base, and through some really hard times, managed to actually pull the game slowly out of the rut that the launch of the game had made. EA weren't making money on Battlefront 2, but service continued anyway to try and repair the game and glue together the fragments of the shattered player base. With new maps, new heroes, new content from all eras of Star Wars, Battlefront 2 had slowly turned into the game that it was always supposed to be. And this turnaround started to catch on for people who hadn't played the game since launch, and more people were coming back to the game throughout 2019 specifically. Now this takes us to the launch of Jedi Fallen Order, the single player Star Wars game that EA seemingly tried to sweep under the rug. It had a lack of marketing for a game like this, and it seemed as if EA intentionally tried to sabotage the game. But the thing is, Jedi Fallen Order turned out to be a really great game with only a couple noticeable flaws. Now keep in mind, well prior to Fallen Order's release, EA came out and said that single player games are apparently not what Star Wars fans want. They were basically saying, we can't monetize the shit out of a single player game like we can with multiplayer, so we don't want to make those games and you don't want them. But lo and behold, Jedi Fallen Order was released and was met with basically universal praise, giving us a story of a Padawan who survived the Jedi Purge during the events of Revenge of the Sith and lived in hiding from the Empire and its Jedi hunters. Obviously he gets found out, and then the story kicks off with some deep lore, bringing back characters we already know whilst giving us a great protagonist and antagonist to help anchor this canon story. And it really did help bridge the gap between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And it even gave us different perspectives of Order 66, which was just so damn cool, and me being the Revenge of the Sith fanboy that I am, it elevated Fallen Order to the position of my favourite Star Wars game. Now bias aside, Jedi Fallen Order was truly a great game and has really revived a majority of people's interest in Star Wars games once again. Because this game is living proof that an amazing Star Wars game can be made with EA overlooking the project. Granted, Fallen Order's success and quality is a testament to Respawn Entertainment who made the game, but if Fallen Order was a flop, then the rebound of Star Wars games wouldn't be as impactful as it is right now. Fallen Order is low-key kind of the hero for this sudden reimagination and perspective of the current state of Star Wars games. Now when you combine the success of Jedi Fallen Order with the resurgence of Battlefront 2, you have a lot of people coming back to Star Wars games. Giving both of these games a try and realizing that the current two modern Star Wars AAA titles are actually really good. Fallen Order, a fantastic and surprisingly good single-player Star Wars game, and Battlefront 2 in a terrific state in one of the best gaming comebacks of all time. The perspective of Star Wars games had literally just changed in what seemed like something that just came together perfectly. And then in December of 2019, with the current lift of Star Wars games, Battlefront 2 went and dropped a brand new free DLC which included content from Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. And the trailer for this DLC garnered millions and millions and millions of views. So combine that with the release of the new film and you have even more new players coming to the game. Lead designer of Battlefront 2, Dennis Brandval, even tweeted out that Battlefront 2's player numbers had seen a rise and were almost back at launch numbers 2 years after the game's release. A pretty crazy achievement, so 2019 finished off with a massive bang for Star Wars games, with majority of the people who had been burnt from the misfires of previous Star Wars games coming back and eagerly awaiting what is in store for the future of Star Wars in the gaming industry. Will we get an Old Republic game? Will we get a Knights of the Old Republic remake, a High Republic game, a Jedi Fallen Order sequel, hell even a Battlefront 3? The speculation has gone through the roof. And it is largely due to Star Wars games bouncing back in a big way in 2019. It truly has been a massive rollercoaster ride, and as someone who runs a Star Wars gaming channel, I don't think anyone was more relieved with this comeback and redemption of Star Wars games than I was. But that of course brings us to now. Star Wars gamers filled with optimism and high hopes for the future, even after the complete catastrophe of the past two Battlefront games. But through giving the fans what they actually want from Star Wars games, things have completely turned around. Fancy that, giving fans what they want and not screwing them over actually makes them happy. It's absolute madness. So it seems EA have taken note and the future of Star Wars games is now as bright as ever, and we have the redemption of Battlefront 2 and the surprising quality of Jedi Fallen Order to thank for this. So what is next for the Star Wars rollercoaster? All fingers are pointing to a game set in the Old Republic, with it possibly being a Knights of the Old Republic sequel. Some sources say the next game will be a Knights of the Old Republic remake. And some sources say that the brand new High Republic era will be when the next Star Wars game takes place as an introduction, and then the High Republic era will feature in upcoming films on the big screen. So these seem the three most likely options for what is next for Star Wars games, and I think whatever way it ends up going, it's going to be great for fans. I personally would like to see this new High Republic era so Disney can, make it their own so fans can't get angry if something isn't treated exactly the way they want it to. Some Star Wars fans feel like they have way too much entitlement over established characters, which limits what writers can do with said characters without receiving stupid amounts of backlash. If Disney go and make something their own, they won't have to worry about that, because if they go into the Old Republic and play around with, say, Darth Revan, and they don't do the exact things that fans want them to do, then it's not going to go down well. So I would like to see Disney jump into it, make it their own with new characters, and then it could be something fresh and exciting and less prone to backlash. And I mean, we all just want great Star Wars content to enjoy and not to be at each other's throats. So the potential for Star Wars games looks really, really great, and it's going to be one hell of an interesting future. So guys, that was basically the story of the redemption of Star Wars games. It's been one hell of a rollercoaster ride, and it seems as if we're in a great place right now, which is pleasing, given the dark times we've gone through over the past few years. But guys, what are your thoughts on all of this? What Star Wars game do you want to see next? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, and drop a like if you did enjoy this video, and if you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe for more Star Wars gaming content. But that's going to do it for me today, so thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you all again in the next one.